Greetings, fellow Kerbonauts! Welcome to Kerbal Space Program. My name is Rice, and this is the Rocketception Challenge. So if you've been keeping track of my series, you've probably come to realize that I have a bit of an obsession with those B9 cargo bays, as I've been putting them on a lot of my launch vehicles to include my vast fleet of space shuttles. And when my friends asked me why I enjoyed using those cargo bays so much, I simply answered, well, because you can put stuff in them. And it was then that they said something that completely blew my mind. They said, well, if you like those cargo bays so much, why don't you put a cargo bay in your cargo bay? And then it hit me. By Jove, I think I've got the most Kerbal way to stage a rocket. This little puppy has the ability to launch a rocket from within a rocket from yet another rocket. So effectively, that would make 4 rockets total. And as our fuel drains to about 50%, it's about time to open up the doors on our first stage to reveal our second stage. Now, one of the concerns I had when assembling this rocket are the doors to the first stage, in that they open so arduously slow. And in order to make sure that those doors open in time, we have to open them pretty early before the first stage runs out of fuel. And there's our second stage, and as you can see, it has a little skipper engine down there with an orange fuel tank, and it fits just barely into the cargo bay. And we are out of fuel, time to come on out, and look how majestically that first stage just falls away. And if you notice, those parachutes popping out add some semblance of reusability to this vehicle. And off we go with our second stage. Now, another concern of mine was trying to figure out a way to fit all these cargo bays inside one another. Now, it's pretty obvious that the developer of the B9 mod didn't really anticipate putting cargo bays into cargo bays. However, as you can see, it's a pretty tight fit putting all of these cargo bays into one another, let alone these rockets themselves. And as you can see, the next stage is kind of pudging itself out, sticking out a little bit out of the cargo bay. And that was kind of an issue for me because it was really difficult to figure out a way to fit it in there. Unfortunately, what this also leads to is the next stage is kind of stuck into that cargo bay, and it takes a little bit of special maneuvering in order to dislodge that next stage out of that cargo bay, and that's something you're going to see in a little bit. Now, this second stage was originally anticipated to get into suborbital flight. However, it was about this time that I realized, wow, we've got a lot of fuel. And actually, believe it or not, we've got enough fuel to not only get into suborbital flight, but also get us into stable orbit. And just look at Jebediah, happy as a clam. No doubt excited that he gets to fly something that's not a space shuttle for once. Not to mention, this thing is actually pretty stable for something meant to carry a payload inside of a payload inside of yet another payload. And just so you know, even though this thing may look like it has some semblance of functionality about it, this rocket is completely inefficient. I mean, there's no practical purpose for it. The staging is a little bit awkward. You have to add extra parts that you don't necessarily have to add if you're doing traditional staging. And not to mention, you're wasting valuable fuel because you have to wait for the cargo bays to open, and then you have to let the next stage drift out, and then, and only then, after you are clear of the previous stage, do you ignite the next engine and move on. However, inefficiency aside and weird awkwardness aside, this is actually a pretty neat little vehicle here, and it's a very Kerbal way, let's put it, to launch a payload into space, even though you could probably launch larger, heavier, bulkier payloads without being forced to use these cargo bays. And now that we have circularized our orbit, it's time to open up our cargo bay doors and move on to our third stage. And look at that little critter down there. Now, as you can see, the fuselage is pretty well lodged into the second stage cargo bay. It's stuck in there effectively. And the only way to get it out is to use all of those Separatrons I've attached to it. And there we go! Zipping off with all the grace of a flailing chicken. Now this is a pretty big contrast from the graceful separation we had from our first stage earlier, as both of those parts previously, the first and second stage, fit pretty perfectly inside. However, this one, I tried other methods like wiggling it about and trying to jostle it loose, but because this fuselage clipped into the cargo bay, it was really stuck in there. And there have been some instances where I'd fire off those Separatrons, and I think it's the heat or the plume from those Separatrons that would cause the second cargo bay to spontaneously explode. However, you can see everything is in relatively one piece, and our next payload is getting ready for launch. And look at that little guy there. I think I'll probably rename this the Rube Goldberg rocket. I mean, look at all this. We launched more than 125 tons worth of rockets just to send a really tiny 1-ton payload into orbit. And this guy here is actually not made of 0.5 meter parts. And I decided to add some little wheels underneath it for some flair, just to see if we can make this thing land and rove off. So, effectively, it's a little tiny rocket car. Okay, it's time to go into our deorbit burn and prepare to head back into the atmosphere so we can drop our last payload. So as we set our deorbit burn, we're looking to see if we can set this thing down somewhere in the middle of the main continent on Kerbal, the largest landmass out there. And hopefully we can land her in the middle of some sort of green field, a place that would make it easier for us to do some roving. And now that we have completed our deorbit burn, it is now time to decouple our last rocket. And let's do this. Oh my gosh. Well, we've lost our solar panels. Oh, well, that was completely unexpected. Well, let's see if we can... And, well, it gets a little bit worse. I'm swinging this vehicle around, and I'm thrusting about, trying to get this last rocket off of my cargo bay, and it is stuck in there. Oh, the terrible nature of my hubris in attaching those rover wheels has unfortunately and accidentally caused me to leave the payload stuck in the cargo bay. Okay, let's see if we could swing this thing out. Okay, we know it's a little bit loosey-loose in there. However, the only thing that's keeping it in there are those 4 wheels that have clipped right through the bay. Come on, get out of there. Oh, Jeb, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to do this. Come on. Get out of there. Okay, so let's see if we can do a spin. We're going to do like some sort of crazy centrifugal spin. See if we could swing this thing out. Oh my gosh, someone must have stuck like some sort of super glue or something on it because it is not getting out of that cargo bay. Come on, get out of there. Spin, spin, spin. And here we are toppling like some sort of amateur ballerina as we try to get this last piece of cargo out of the payload. Oh, okay, so it took a lot of work, but we finally got that vehicle free. Oh boy, okay, so now we can continue with the mission. And now that we've got our last rocket released from the cargo bay of our 3rd stage, it is time to deploy the parachutes on the 3rd stage so it lands safely back to Kerbal. And time for Jeb, the mighty Jeb, to make his jet all the way to our rocket stage. And oh, where did it go? Where? Oh boy, I probably should have attached some lights to the guy. Because against the blackness of space, it's a little bit difficult to find, and I think I found it. Oh, there it is. Okay, let's move it on up to our rocket, and slowly but carefully, here we go. Come on, Jeb, you can do this. Let's take that seat, And bullseye. Okay, now we are ready to head back to Kerbin. And not only land, but rove in style once we return. Alright, so fingers crossed. Let's see if we can get Jeb back home safely. So we're going to time warp until we hit the atmosphere, and that didn't take very long. We are in the atmosphere now. Okay, hope you got your seatbelts on there, Jeb. And man, looks like you're a little bit off on that command chair. Let's get you back into it. And there we go. What's curious about the little command chair, and I'm not sure if this is true or not, but it's always good to play it safe, is that sometimes when you sit those Kerbals on those command chairs, they have a tendency to dislodge themselves just slightly, and so they're not perfectly nestled into the command chair. Sometimes the physics of the spacecraft will jostle jostle your Kerbals in such a way where they will sit slantwise of the command chair. And my theory is that it makes them a little bit looser, and they're not necessarily attached snugly into the seat, and it has a greater tendency for them to fall off. And so now and then I'll have them get out of the command chair and come back in so that they are nestled nice and snug into that chair and more secured there. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but I take that precaution anyways, just in case. And to help alleviate the tedium of re-entry, we're going to scoot along here at 5 times speed while Jebediah experiences the glory that is a fiery re-entry. And unfortunately, there's no efficient way to stabilize ourselves coming into the atmospheres. We're forced to tumble about using only our parachutes to stabilize the craft, mainly because we don't have any torque aside from that tiny little probe body down there. And we're turning off SAS in order to help conserve battery power. And so now we've slowed down just a little bit, and we are coming down nice and easy. Okay, 500 meters, parachute should open. Here we go. You ready, Jeb? Oh my gosh, no, Jeb! Oh, we've lost Jeb. Okay, we're by the way, we're back down to regular time speed here. Well, let's see if we can get this vehicle down to the ground at least. By itself, it's controllable with that probe body, and curious, it looks like Jeb hasn't died. He's still alive. Oh man, okay, the invincible, immortal Jeb is waiting for his cargo below. Okay, in a way, this is kind of a Kerbal version of Yuri Gagarin's re-entry into the planet. And now, as everyone knows, Yuri Gagarin was the first man into space, pretty much. He went up in April of '61. And what a lot of people don't know is that when he came back to the planet, he didn't bring his capsule with him. His capsule is a round spherical capsule, and it helps with center of gravity, and the design was purposed in such a way where the cosmonaut would be comfortable regardless of the capsule's orientation. However, the downside of it was it didn't have the ability to land safely with the cosmonaut inside. And so what Yuri Gagarin had to do was about 20,000 feet from the ground. He jumped out of his capsule and effectively ejected. Now, this has caused some controversy amongst science nerds and geeks because the argument is that, well, is it really a true, complete manned spaceflight if you abandon your spacecraft during re-entry? However, both sides of the house have raised some pretty good arguments. As for myself personally, well, I frankly don't know. And as far as I'm concerned, Yuri Gagarin was the first guy up there in space and the first guy to come back down from space with or without his spacecraft. I don't think it really matters. Going into space is quite an accomplishment. And for Jebediah here, who abandoned his spacecraft without a parachute, well, that takes true guts. Okay, so here we are waiting what I can only imagine to be the tall grass as he seems to be clipping into the countryside as he waits patiently for his rover to come down. Okay, there it is. Come on, Jeb. Let's go get it. Run, run, run. Running towards our rover. And there it is, dropped serenely into the ground. And let's see if we can get up there. Jeb is clipped into the ground. However, the rover doesn't seem to be. So there seems to be a little bit of double standards going on there with the countryside working against Jeb, but not the craft. Okay, so let's go ahead and rove about. And with only 200 units of power, we can't do much. But anyway, let's test these thrusters and see if we can get to the lake. And oh boy, let's stabilize. Come on, keep it up, keep it up, keep it up. No, Jeb. Well, then he survives a half-kilometer fall from space, and yet, squashed by a 1/3 ton vehicle. Poor Jeb. Well, my name is Rice, and we'll see you next time.